Welcome to the Insight podcast. Joining me on the show today is Josh Wheeler. Josh is the founder of the PR consultancy B Broadcast and the author of Mission Control, The Climate Conversation, a report exploring how the UK media is covering climate change and what this means for all of us. I talked to Josh about whether throwing soup on works of art is really an effective form of climate activism, what he's found about the way climate change is reported in the news, the power of stories to bring about change, why we need to talk more to people we disagree with, and much more. Right, before we start, quick favour, please hit the follow button wherever you're tuning into this episode. And also, if you've been listening to the show for a while, I'd really appreciate it if you rated the show too. This will help more listeners discover the podcast and the insights from all of my incredible guests. Right, now for my conversation with Josh Wheeler. Enjoy. Okay, soup being thrown on works of art, spray paint being put on Stonehenge. What are your thoughts on those kind of actions, Josh?
I think this is a really interesting one. And I think that it's a perfect example of how important protest is. No development, engagement, progress comes from sitting there silent. You look at the movements of the suffragettes, you look at race relations in the States. All of these things have peak moments that get in the way, but they're important. They're important, and they, at the time, they irritate, and at the time they agitate, and that is the point of them. They have to find a way to break through the noise. So there are so many voices in this world, but I think what has been really powerful, and I'm going to come on to the other side in a second, what has been really powerful about this is that every single person in the country, possibly in the world, knows what their mission is, right? Whether you agree with it is a different thing, but to get people to be switched on to your focus and your agenda by shocking them, you have to admit is effective. Now, the flip of this is that what has happened is that people haven't necessarily followed along with them. And I think that part of that is that the movement in itself is so big, and you have lots of different groups, fractions, pieces of activity. It's not necessarily clear, sustained, thought through. It's almost opportunistic. And I get it, right? I get it. The challenge is that the narrative and the focus from the public and the media has turned. So people now see the, soup being thrown at something, and that is the story, as opposed to the issue being the story. And what you've now seen is that you have these groups that are starting to, I don't want to say grow up, because they're not immature. I don't believe they're not immature. They're smart individuals in terms of being able to capture attention the way that they have. But what you're starting to see is almost like a professional viewpoint. They've talked about how this direct action is going to stop because they've achieved some of their goals. I think that realistically they've realized that the media isn't with them on that direct action route anymore. And what's going to happen is, or I hope, is that they're going to take a different route. You're still going to hear from them. These are smart, creative people. Whether you like what they do or not, these are smart people. And I think that we're going to see a very different view from them, but we can't take away from the impact that they've had. Our stuff, I think we'll talk about the report. Our report talks about the challenges of getting cut through for this topic, and we'll talk about that. But the people that have gained cut through, the the organizations involved, it's these guys.
Right.
So if anyone has done anything positive for climate change, it's these guys, because they've got it on the agenda.
Yeah. They've got people talking about it. But I see what you mean as well, and how other people could see it as like just purely performative. It's like, okay, you've done that, but what's the action that you're taking as well? And what action are you suggesting? It's a bit like, I think there's parallels with the people that will share in their stories, like, look at these shocking things that are going on around the world. And so, okay, I get it. You're trying to draw attention and you're adding this, you're showing that you care about it in some ways, but actually at the end of the day, has that made any difference because you've shared that in your Instagram stories to your 500 followers? What are you actually doing to reduce the suffering in the world? Same with these people. What are you actually doing to affect climate change? And this is maybe the frustrations of people. Like, okay, you've done that action, but what are you actually doing? And also, you're just kind of annoying people. If you lie down in the middle of the road, you're just disrupting people who aren't like the main culprits. They're not, they're not to blame. It's other people that are to blame. And so there's a whole load of stuff, isn't there?
It's so hard, because if you think about it, I think if you were to ask those protesters, the ones that lie down in the road, right? If you were to ask them about the impact that they're having on, say, ambulances being able to get through, I would be very surprised if their goal or their, focus was genuinely just to disrupt. And I think that's where it's in the kind of the psyche of the nation. That's what it's become. And so actually the thing that has happened, as opposed to what they really wanted was for us to all go, this is a nightmare, and we need to all collectively band together to point towards, hold the people to account that are in charge of this. I think it's interesting you talk about the action. See, the call to action for people wasn't as strong as it could be, but I don't think that's necessarily their fault. I think that the call to action was that we should all wake up to kind of what is going on here, and we should all be on the same page. The difficulty comes is that we in the UK, you're in Birmingham, I'm in Manchester, we don't think as a collective that we are seeing the impact of climate change. So you're asking people to, and I mean that on our doorstep. We see it in, far-flung nations. And that feels very distant, feels very disconnected to us. If we were facing things on the front line that we could, it would be really hard to argue against. So, every couple of years, a big flood. I think people can quite quickly go, that's just bad weather. I think if we were really facing it and really seeing impacts, it would be a very different situation. That call to action, people would be much more moved by the action that these groups were taking. The difficulty that they faced is getting people to be engaged and to be really switched on with a subject that isn't necessarily hitting them in their hearts and minds. And that's the bit where PR, I believe, has the ability to engage people's hearts and minds. You have to be able to sit down and talk to people and get them to realize why a subject matters. And I think that's been the bit that's missing. It's been shock and awe and disruption and whereas there needs to be light and shade. You need to have different levels of discussion with people, and hopefully that's what we'll start to get now. That's what we'll start to get more of the come with us, as opposed to we're going to lie down in the road and stop you from getting to work.
And the stories, it's all about stories, isn't it? Like what people can't really engage so much perhaps with numbers and figures and temperatures and that kind of thing. It's actually what's the story? How is this really affecting people? And let's hear from the people it's affecting, and how might it affect me? How might it affect me? And so a different angle, a different approach is something I want to talk to you about. But before we get onto that, you mentioned the report, and so that's linked to this. What you found in that report is that climate change coverage is overwhelmingly event driven, I think is the phrase. So what does that mean? Is basically what you found, that any highlighting of this issue is only when people take drastic action, which might not be popular, but it's like, well, this is what people stand up and listen to. Is that what we're talking about here?
It's exactly that. So to kind of caveat this, I am not in any way, we are not in any way, climate experts. We're probably as au fait with it as the average person. I have the same things and challenges of which bin to put my bottles in and all that stuff. But what we're really interested in, and my firm belief at B Broadcast, is that broadcast has the power, has always had the power, and will always have the power in whatever guise it is to engage people to take action, much more so than any other media. Because sitting and having a conversation, we're having a conversation in a podcast form, sitting and having a conversation allows you to hear the things that I'm passionate about, because my voice will change. If you're watching it, you'll see how I'm more animated about certain subject. That is conveyed much more so than reading a paper about stats and facts. So we analysed over a 6-month period all of the mentions and discussions of climate change. So during that 6-month period, we had it was a wild time in the world of climate. So we had the wildfires in the States, we had floods in Spain, we had the US pulling out of the Paris Agreement, and we also had quite a lot of climate related activity in South America, which actually got no pickup whatsoever. But the thing that is really distracting in a something like this, in an issue like this, is that, as you say, we only talk about climate change when a crisis hits. So when something metaphorically explodes, or literally explodes in the case, that's when the focus happens, and that's a massive problem, because climate change is ongoing, and the media treat it as it's just episodic. Something happens, we go there and we see fire and we go, oh, it's terrible, I feel so awful. And then you start to get the fallout of stuff. Well, LA is a very rich area, so why should we feel so sorry for people who've lost everything? Then you have people saying, well, parts of LA are not rich, and suddenly you're having this conversation, about where does our care stop and lie? And that's bonkers. But when there isn't a dramatic event, it's like this, like a roller coaster drop, huge dip in terms of coverage. And there are very few subjects that have such significant drops. Like I've worked in the sector for 15 years, and I was surprised at just how up and down this subject is, because we looked at things to try and create comparisons. We looked at things like the economy, which is obviously huge, cost of living, and the discussions around climate change were dwarfed. We're talking hundreds of thousands of mentions of the economy, of cost of living crisis, versus I think just 65,000 mentions of climate change. The bit that really hit me was, we were trying to see, well, why aren't we looking at this? Why aren't we exploring this more? Sorry, it was 45,000 mentions over 6 months. And then we started to look at, well, what are we talking about? Not necessarily in its place, but what is hitting. And one of the things that we found was, we looked at the Oscars. So there is a bit of buzz around the Oscars as it builds up, but it's not long term. It's a one night event, really. I don't know if you can remember what won Best Film or who won Best what. I can't. But the Oscars received 65% of the total mentions of climate change. And that I find scary, because it means that you and I aren't hearing and listening and kind of weaving it into the fabric of our lives in the same way that we are about cost of living, about what's going on in EastEnders or Coronation Street or whatever. Actually, it's just when we hear these scary moments. And I'm not taking away from the Oscars. We need glitz, glamour. People love to, look at the outfits and dissect and be like, I like that, I don't like that. We need that. We need all of these things. But my point is that actually, when you start to think that 65%, that the Oscars, a one night event, gets 65% of the total mentions. And then when you put that into the frame and the guise of, well, you had the LA fires, you had the floods, you had the US withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, you had all of these major moments, you start to go, that didn't get the attention that it should have done.
No. And because we are just so distracted, aren't we? We're just so distracted by these little things, the celebrity weddings and who's broken up with who now and that kind of stuff. And as you say, there's an element of just, we all need a bit of like relief, and we need to laugh, and we need to gossip, and we need to be angry, and all these things. Like, that's all fine, part of human nature. But yeah, it's like how little attention is paid to an existential crisis like climate change. It's bizarre. And then I link it to social media and what we're seeing here, and like the content that does well. And like, I find myself as well playing the game of, I need to put out a short video, and it needs to have something in the first 3 seconds to grab people's attention. It needs a hook, and it needs to be a bit controversial. It needs to be clickbaity. And I'm like, man, I'm just feeding into this new normal that we've got, this new culture of just grab people's attention, try and hold it. Doesn't matter what the actual content is, because you've got to get your head up above all the noise that's being posted out there. And so I guess that then links back into why these forms of action, of climate action and climate activism, are effective, because there's no other way to get out above the Oscars and the, I don't know, Will Smith hit Chris Rock and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So is that again then a case of we should be doing this, or is there another way? Like, can we not play this game? But is it just like we're too far down the line? It's like the train has left the station, so you've just got to play the game. And if you don't, then no one's going to be talking about climate change.
You've really hit the nail on the head. I think it's exactly that. Our attention is being pulled in 1,000 different ways. You have your own curated media list, in a sense, of who you follow on social media. Some people will naturally gravitate towards media outlets that say one thing, and vice versa. None of that is wrong, right? None of that is. We get a lot of people talking about echo chambers. I actually think in this world, an echo chamber is possibly not a bad thing, in the sense of, there needs to be a bit of self-preservation, and there's so much bad news. Just being presented with the bad isn't necessarily, or presented with views that you struggle with, isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's when it starts to form your worldview that changes. I think you're absolutely right in terms of how direct action has been so effective, because it's shocking. It shocks you, and it becomes the thing that can buzz your news alerts. Oh my God, I can't believe they've thrown soup at the Mona Lisa, or they've done this, or they've done that. And that is why that has been so effective. The bit that I think is really, really important is, and it's a societal factor, but it also impacts on why I love this media so much, is that where do we go as a society? Do we just live and exist in headlines? And maybe we do in the future, but I don't think we do. I don't think that when we talk to each other, we talk headlines. I think we learn things through headlines, and then and those things can be right, they can be wrong. And then we share that information with each other, and we talk about it. What do we think? What do we feel? What do we believe on top of that? How does that shape what we do with our families and our friends? And the bit that I think works really effective within broadcast is, the headline is one thing, but if you've got an interview, you've got 7 minutes, broadly 7 minutes, to then talk through and reach that person. So I get angry when I'm working with brands, clients that tell us that they don't and won't talk to a certain type of media, certain outlets, for instance. Because I think what a wasted opportunity to engage. Whether they agree with you or not, who cares? Because there is, in every issue, we're so polarized. There are going to be people that absolutely love what you say. There are going to be people that absolutely despise what you say. And then there's the movable middle. And it's these people in the middle that they might not agree with all of it. They might not hate all of it. And those are the people that you're talking to. And just being there and providing a point of view, even if the presenter is mocking you. And we've seen this within climate change. We've seen some of these outlets do this, right? But you can play their game. You can play their game. And if you know, for instance, that, what the parameters are, that they've got you there because they want a clip to use on social media to mock you, you can play that. When you know the rules of the game, you can use it to your advantage. I think where we've got to, and we talked about echo chambers, the challenge is that sometimes within these echo chambers, we then just close off and disappear and go away. And actually, I always encourage people to look at that movable middle, because those people aren't, they're not the hard sides of an argument. But where you have the biggest opportunity with those people is to sit and reach them. So sit and reach them about how does this thing that feels intangible, because all you think when you think at this stage about climate change is, I've got to put all my stuff in different bins. I even referenced it earlier. I've got to put my stuff in different bins. It's annoying. And it's raining. I live in Manchester and it's always raining. And I've got to go out to the bins and rather just lob it at one. But you have to basically try to challenge that notion and make me go, actually, that's important. That's worth my time. It's worth my time doing that with the bins. It's worth my time learning why that's important. And that's where we haven't got to. I think that there's some good learnings to be had when it comes to climate change from the animal testing movement that we saw in the 90s and the noughties. So most people now would agree that testing on animals is wrong. But at the time, it was kind of the norm, right? And there were a lot of people that would say, well, you have to test makeup on animals, or whatever it is, makeup on animals, to make sure that when it comes to humans, it's not going to cause it. That's common sense. And slowly we realized that there were other ways of doing this. But what was really effective, I think, it was very of its time, but what was very effective was that you had direct action, right? You had people breaking into these centers and releasing animals, right? You had that going on. That was shocking. The equivalent of lying down in the street. But on the other side, you had celebrities, and I don't know if it was outfits or very often makeup, but you had celebrities that were painted and dressed up as tigers in a cage. And then that would become a front page story. And people would go, usually it was someone that was very good looking at the time. They'd be like, oh, wow, she looks amazing. He looks amazing. And then you'd start to read that this is actually from an animal rights group. The light and the shade,
Nice,
the light and the shade, suddenly, and I know it's gross and it's of its era. We need the equivalent of that in its current form to catch people and make them kind of come into this conversation without it being, I'm going to disrupt and ruin your day. So it's the light and the shade, the light and the shade. The difficulty is can you build back in the light into something that has just been all about direct action? That's the challenge that those groups face now, and capturing attention. But there are lots of different ways to do it. I think they've just focused in on one specific area to now.
Yeah, light and shade, or just action, but backed up by substance. You can't just put I don't know, a photograph out there on social media and the caption is crap. What are you actually trying to tell me here? So I like that. Yeah, action with substance. And
this is the other bit, right? Is
Yeah.
the other bit is how do you make people do something? What is the call to action to you and I?
Mm.
Because at the moment here in the UK, we're not seeing those, huge implications. So how do I make you really pay attention to what is going on the other side of the world,
Yeah.
in our minds, on the other side of the world, and do something about it? That's the bit. It's we need to change it so that it's looking at how this is impacting us. I've got thoughts
Mm.
in terms of like what we should do, but we have to make people care. We have
Yeah.
to make people see what it is that's happening here and what could be happening here.
Well, like the stories that we said, and isn't this kind of linked to? I feel like they've looked into this with charities, and charities that are trying to raise money for people like malnourishment in a country in Africa or something like that. And like one route that they can take is, we need to raise this much and then we can save these millions of children. One route. The other route is like you just show them the one child and name them. This girl, whatever her name is, age 7, and this is what she's going through. And people donate to that, even though like you're only hearing about the one child, because it's so personal and it's a story, people can relate to that. So it feels like, yeah, climate change action, global warming is another way we can learn from that. And it sounds like they just need a bit more media training, and so they need some tips from you.
It's not just me, but just it's the broader environment. I think they should be looking, more generally at what it is that's making cut through. You've again, you hit the nail on the head. Like some of the videos that have done really well, the moments that have done really well, in recent years. There was the there was the video of it was a little girl celebrating her birthdays each year
Hmm.
in the UK. And then it followed that path of her celebrating her birthdays, but during wartime. And that little girl was British, and everyone was kind of like, "Oh, that feels very shocking." There was the other one around. I think it was to do with education rights um, for girls, and they did it as the Spice Girls wannabe. It was the girls performing wannabe in their country. Again, people were like, "This is incredible," and they got behind it. But their relation to it is that actually, when I was a girl, wannabe was a moment in my life. Girl power and all of that stuff with that, how much of that was reality is a different thing. But it was such a moment. I was Ginger Spice. My friend was Baby Spice, and it's there. It unlocks a memory and a moment. And
Yeah.
actually, suddenly, the issue is that they're saying to us, this video is saying to us that these girls deserve education and they deserve rights. Of course, we agree.
Mm.
That's the jaws of girl power.
Mm.
And suddenly we're there. And we haven't had that, I don't think, for climate change. We haven't had it. I think those things where we talk about culture and society and those things, that's what we need to be looking at. Like when you think about some of these other major subjects that are hard to grapple with, 15 years ago, we would look at things like mental health as a subject. And I remember, talking to clients about, well, this is an issue that seems to be growing in terms of focus and attention. What are your policies? How are you approaching this? All very new. Similarly with media, all very new. How do you get this to kind of come to the fore? Whereas now, mental health campaigns, I don't mean to throw this away, but they're 10 a penny.
Mm-hmm.
It's so common. It's so everyone is so on the front foot about this issue, and that's just because it's been a focus. There's light and shade. There's the campaigns that are shocking, that really hit you squarely between the eyes, and then there are campaigns that are like, light and fun, and you've got comedians kind of making jokes about stuff. It's okay, like that. That has worked really effectively. Obviously, there's more that needs to be done, but it's such a good example. But the thing I would draw into is you look at soap, and soap is a very different beast But you look at how soap has tackled big societal issues that we faced over the years, mental health being one of them. You think about the amount of storylines that soap has covered when it comes to mental health and well-being, cost of living crisis, all of these issues that really impact us. And what it does is it makes conversations at home about these things doable, right? It makes you go, that could, if that's happening to that character there, that's me, that's you, how do we tackle that?
Yeah.
And you know what, soap is a different beast, but I think we need to be looking at light entertainment and how we factor things in. I've kind of joked, but in a weird way, or maybe it's not a joke. Maybe we need to be looking at like Love Island or whatever the new version of Love Island is set in a pretty plush, lovely area. Maybe we need to move Love Island to an area where actually climate change is impacting, where it's part of the story, not the story. Do you get my drift? It's that we at home are then going, oh, they can't go outside today because it's absolutely flooded. They're being evacuated because it's a horrendous. And I know that, production and all of that becomes a bit of a minefield. But when you start to filter it into that, imagine the people at home sitting and going, oh,
what's that about?
That's serious.
I might actually watch
It's
Love
not
Island
just,
if that was the case. Yeah.
but,
I've never seen an episode, but yeah.
No, me either, to be honest. But when you start to put it into those terms, or maybe it's Coronation Street and they go on holiday to an area that they don't realise that is being impacted. I think they only ever go to Blackpool, to be honest. But when you start to put it into that kind of context, you're not kind of hitting them square between the eyes of, you need to do something, you need to change your action, blah, blah, blah. And people go, well, China's not doing anything, so what's me putting a bottle in this bin doing? Actually, when you start to make people see the impact on you, but over there, that I think is the sweet spot. We're not bad people. British people in particular, our charitable donations for international aid, well, both in terms of international aid, but also what people do, rank some of the highest in the world. Like, we aren't bad people. I just think we're not seeing it yet. We're not seeing it yet.
And it is so hard though, isn't it? Because this is something that we might not be really seeing the effects of for another 50 years or 100 years. And then it could be catastrophic. And then it could be, man, we are all absolutely, swear word insert here. But so that's why it's hard. And then the point you made about, well, whatever we do is a tiny dent, because the amount of CO2 that China's pumping out and India's pumping out, and these growing populations that are eating more meat and generating more, all this kind of stuff. And you're like, yeah, I get it. And so you understand why people just throw their hands up and go, well, I'm just going to carry on living the way I'm living because, why not?
Absolutely. But listen, I'm not a politician, but what I would say to that is, and again, I caveat this with, I am not an expert in any way, shape or form, but the way to encourage change is not to give in. The way to encourage change is for everybody to be doing it. And then when everyone's doing it, you can turn around and be saying, hey, why aren't you?
Yeah.
Why aren't you? And, granted, the ins and outs of what major nations do is a huge challenge. But the difficulty is if we all throw our hands up in the air and say, whatever, it legitimizes them saying, well, we're going to carry on doing what we're doing. The way to kind of hit people is to bring them along. But again, we're not even there yet. We're not even there yet. Like, our own media isn't telling us or showing us like the realities of this thing. So to kind of be having the conversation about China, it's almost a given excuse, and that has filtered down into the mindsets and the psyche, and that poses yet another challenge, because if every nation just said, well, China, then we're all cooked.
Yeah, yeah. And it'd be the
Literally
same
and
with if we said
figuratively.
that with human rights or something like that. If we're
Completely.
like, well, they're not doing it, so
Exactly.
we don't need to bother. And yeah, there's definitely
Exactly.
an element of set the example, like be the change you want to see in the world. Like let's just set the no
Exactly.
matter what anyone else is doing, that's fine. But like
Yeah.
there's definitely a few perspectives where you've made me stop in my tracks, to be honest, Josh. Okay, yeah, I didn't quite think about it like that. And it sounds like with the the climate protesters, you're saying give them a little bit more sympathy. Not sympathy, like they don't deserve sympathy, but be like a bit more sympathetic, be a bit more understanding, because I can also understand people's frustrations of like this is just a nuisance and it's not helping it. But now your perspective of no, well, like this is why they're doing it, and actually there's some changes that they're making now. So let's be more understanding.
Uh,
Let's get on the same page. And that, but also what you said about the still get engaged with platforms and media outlets that you maybe don't agree with and don't like morally find questionable, to say the least. Like, I can see that someone wouldn't want to do an interview with the Daily Mail, or they would want to close their X account. And I've done that. Like, I've just stopped posting on X, because you feel like, well, no, I don't want to be posting on there. I don't want to be propping up this guy that I don't agree with the way he's showing up in the world. But then, like I listen to the Rest is Politics podcast, and I'm pretty sure Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart are kind of still on X, and they're like, well, no, because we need someone to be keeping up the voice in those circles. But you can see why that's hard to do, can't you?
I am also someone that has closed my X account,
Right, interesting.
and I think that there is there. So yes, I think there is. And do you remember I said a while ago about echo chambers and self-preservation? I think that's really important, because actually, there's we talk about, and it's almost become a bit of like a jokey term, like doom scrolling. But the impact of doom scrolling, and it's not even. I don't even think it's doom scrolling. It's just doom given, right? You don't get a choice, and I think that for people to be able to, I don't want to sound all like, well-being, but for people to be able to try and put actual positivity in the world, you need to have a fair shot. And just being presented with hell constantly is going to it's going to frame how you look at things. And I think that there is a difference between personal and so kind of corporate
Yeah.
entity.
Or
There's a
public
big difference
profile,
there.
even though it's individual, it's still like you are kind of in a way like a character, like Alistair Campbell or whoever else is like a character of like reason, someone that people look up to. And so yeah, it might not be you complete. Like I find it a little bit with the podcast, and sometimes what I share on social media, like I kind of sometimes play up to a little bit of a character of single guy with no kids, so I'm posting about how I'm lonely. Kind of like you play up to a character because that's what people resonate with and they get it. And so I don't know, like, sorry, I interrupted you, but I get what you mean.
No.
Yeah, yeah.
It's absolutely that. It's absolutely that, in terms of like not what you present to the world, but it's what part of that will be you probably find like self-depreciating, like funny,
Yeah.
it softens the edges of like,
Yes.
I'm a stern person, and it brings people to 100%. The 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 bit I kind of think is that it's fine, I think, for you and I to go, the Daily Mail is not for me. Right, and I'm just using that as an example. The Daily Mail is not for me. It's also the biggest website in the world.
Right.
So when you are a
play
brand,
the game.
yeah, when you are a brand that wants to inflict change, I don't think you can say the Daily Mail is not for me. I don't think you can, genuinely,
Interesting.
because, and I know that there's lots of groups that, and I agree with lots of the ideals in terms of things like stop funding hate and things like that. But the difficulty is those people, it's that same thing. It's that same thing of those people in the middle. Not everyone who reads the Daily Mail is absolutely evil. A lot of people go to the Mail online just for like celebrity news and gossip. And when you look at that content, and whether the celebrity culture and how they do things is one thing, but those people aren't necessarily going there and kind of taking in political ideals of things. They're looking at what like Kim Kardashian is doing. And the Kardashians are another beast to look at. But that that is one thing. And so if you start to go, right, the Mail Online, the Daily Mail, no, because of what they do, suddenly you're in a position where actually, as an organization, you have just snipped off a huge proportion of of
Potential
the
audience.
the people that you can reach.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the difference. It's fine for you to go, do you know what, X, whatever it is not for me because I don't want that. And whether whatever your motivations are in terms of whether you don't want to support Elon Musk or it's like the stuff that you're getting or abuse or stuff like that, that's one thing. That's you as a personal. But you as an organization, if you're on if you've got kind of goals that you want to meet when it comes to sustainability or human rights or this or that or the other, I think it is moribund to not talk to those outlets. And I find it dark that happens.
Mm.
I really do. And I vehemently fight clients on this because I think it's so important. I think it
Interesting.
is so important to be there and to show up in those situations. It's not easy, and it's easy for me as a consultant to say, "Hey, this is what we should do." I don't then have to do the interview, but I think that it's so important because that news that you're creating and putting out into the world, it shouldn't just be for certain types of people.
Mm-hmm.
That's I think it's playing the game. It's doing the exact thing that those difficult media outlets do, just on the other side, and
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
that I don't think is right.
Yeah, and if we were to reduce it all the way down just to two individuals, you'd never be saying to, okay, you two disagree with each other, so never talk to each other again. No,
Not at
no,
all.
like that's
Yeah.
then we're screwed as a society, aren't we? We've got to keep talking. So no, I get it. I get it. I'm wondering. Sorry,
In
go
that
on.
same context, if that person is just purely abusing you, it's
Walk
also
away.
okay to say,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, yeah.
and it's getting the balance right.
Mm.
It's getting the thing. I think the big delineation I would make is that if you are a person, an individual, it's okay for you to make choices about what you take in. If you're an entity with goals,
Mm.
I think you've got to talk to everybody.
Interesting. So, with all that being said, I'm wondering where we can kind of like bring this into land in terms of some kind of something actionable. If we're saying, well, people have got to take more action, like what might be the action? And I'm wondering whether one action is, or one like change that I'm taking away, and maybe the listeners are taking away, is to be more understanding of some of these tactics that people employ when it comes to climate change. But I don't know if you want to speak more to that, and also anything else about how people can draw attention to really important issues, knowing the media landscape, but also knowing what we know about stories and having some substance behind it. So I don't know if that's a
Mm.
wishy-washy question. I hope it's not.
No,
But do
no,
you know
no,
what I
no.
mean? Like, yeah, trying to tie this all into what can we go away with from this conversation with Josh?
You are. So I think so. There's a couple of different kind of bubbles that I would link into this. So if I'm talking to people who are active in the world of climate, so I'm not necessarily just saying like the activists that have done this. I mean people that are wanting more focus, more attention on the world of climate. The report we've drilled into like what are some of the implications for PR that
Mm-hmm.
you need to take into account. But ultimately, I think that what I would really encourage them to do is to, one, go through the report. They will know a lot of this stuff already because they'll be on the front foot. But look at it from the guise of what's the media landscape, right? If the Oscars get 65% of the total mentions, what is it that you can learn from what works for the Oscars that could work for you, right?
Mm.
I want them to use it as a driver of this thing, this glitz glamour, this over here. There's another subject about a storyline on Coronation Street. There's so many discussions and things happening. What other things that can give you that light to the shade, right? That can actually make people sit up and pay attention. Example we work with an epilepsy charity. And one of the pieces of activity was looking at, it was like an annual report looking at how the lives of people, what the lives of people with epilepsy are like. And we were exploring and we were asking people, what are the challenges in life and da da da. And the big question we had back to it is, well, why are we talking to people with epilepsy? They know what their lives are like. They know the challenges that they face. The challenges that they face are not about necessarily having epilepsy. Of course, there are big challenges in there, but the challenges they face are actually other people not caring, not recognizing, not understanding, things that need to be done, whether that's at the world of work and stuff like that. So we flipped it and we started looking at, well, what happens to people when they have a seizure in public? How do people treat them? And we started to find things like people thought they were drunk, they were on drugs. We looked at the worst parts of humanity, the terrible things that happen to people. And we were able to put that on the news agenda. And the reason for that is that actually the activity was to encourage people to learn an acronym, 4 things you need to do when somebody has a seizure in public. We had that advert playing on BBC throughout the day. And people will have engaged with that going, I can do something. All I need to commit to doing here is to learn this thing. I'm going to commit to just spending a bit of time to go, actually, if something happens like that, I'm not going to panic and freak out and kind of run away. I'm going to go, I can actually help. And all that we asked people to do was commit to learning something. So when you look at the people on the other side of this, is actually maybe the encouragement, and maybe this is asking a lot of people, but I think it's worth it, is to ask people to ask the question, why? Why has this direct action route happened? And I think the report points to why it does, because I don't think they will necessarily have just started with direct action, but they haven't got the cut through that they needed. And then start to kind of go, well, okay, let's play devil's advocate. Why is this happening? Why have they been doing this? And try to just kind of pull out of, the usual mindset of like, okay, this means this. And when you start to do that, you start to go, okay, look, these people are really passionate. Let's try and give a bit of grace. And I know that is so frustrating and they haven't helped themselves. But if we can do that, then actually we can start to connect. And if they on this side are looking at ways to engage people in ways and formats that work, and they here start to think, okay, let's give them a bit of grace, actually you can start to see people coming together genuinely. Yeah. Whether that happens is a different beast, but it's going to take time, but I think that it would be really, really fruitful for sure.
Yeah. You feel like that is an edging a bit closer to meeting in the middle by following that. I like that. And then any other, like, one last thing about deciphering the whole climate change narrative that we see, because it is, I mean, you've mentioned polarizing viewpoints already. It is like we've got one hand, in 10 years, we're all screwed, climate change is coming. And on the other hand, you've got politicians saying it doesn't exist, it's made up, we don't need to worry about it, open up the coal factories again, we're fine, it's all good. And like, I don't know whether I'm coming or going. I don't know what's true. I don't know how in this media and news world, how on earth do you decipher what is real, what is accurate, who should I listen to? Is that just, again, the train has left the platform? We're all like, everyone's just all over the place.
The thing I find myself saying more and more recently is that, remember a couple of you used to be a teacher, so you'll be in this space. So a couple of years ago, there used to be a joke about media studies degrees, Mickey Mouse courses. Who needs to learn about how to do? I think you need a degree in media studies just to survive these days. Right. And I'm not even kidding, because actually there are so many sources of information and there are so many voices. Mm-hmm. Social media has done an awful lot for the world. It's also done an awful lot of bad for the world. And one of the areas that it has done an awful lot of bad is that we just don't know where to look. Mm-hmm. We don't know where to, who to trust. And I think what politics has done is politics has lost its professionalism.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be, broadly, it used to be that politics, yes, there was always kind of ego and focus, but ultimately you could effectively, at the core, trust politicians to guide on what needed to be done. We've just come off the back of VE Day. It was a really interesting documentary on Netflix. And you look at Winston Churchill, who most people in the UK and around the world respect as an incredible leader. And it was interesting to look at the behind the scenes of what was going on and, focus on various different things. I don't think we have that anymore. I don't think we have those leaders. I think we have leaders that think they're like those leaders, but they're not actually emulating.
They don't have quite the same class, do they?
No. And it's more of a characterization. And ultimately it comes down to our personal choice and what we believe. Politicians should, in theory, be trying to bring us together. I think they have realized that actually, you don't really even hear that framing anymore. I think they've realized that actually success comes from completely keeping us apart. And to an extent, we have to find our own way through. And we have to decide who we trust and who we believe. I think politics it's almost created a nail in its own coffin, because over time, I think we're going to realize that actually we don't need them. We don't need the House of Lords. We don't need the House of Commons, because we're not even engaging and listening to our MPs. Mm-hmm. We're listening to people over here that are saying X, Y, and Z. And then we're going to our MPs when it matters and saying, well, what about what they said? And they're taken by surprise. And I think that politics should really try and, it needs to have a good long look at itself. And some modernization. You see, zooming out of climate change, you watch things like the closing down. I don't know what I don't even know what you call it. Proroguing of Parliament. The ceremonies of those things, and that it's broadcast, and you've got Black Rod. I'm British, I should know this. It's our tradition. It's blah blah blah. I don't. Banging on the door and shouting things. I was sat watching it and I was thinking, do you know what? I'm mid-30s. We've grown up with this. But what does a person who's 18 think about this nonsense? And suddenly you start to go, well, actually in 10 years' time, when those people are my age and they really don't care, you're in a different world. And so politics, I think it really, it needs a real shake. Prime Minister's questions, shocking, I think, is one of the worst examples of society. You take an issue and you've got, can you imagine being in a boardroom where you get asked a question and you're trying to answer that question and your peers are shouting and jeering at you?
Yeah, like interrupting you and shouting over you, booing, and yeah.
What example is that setting? Yeah. And I understand, where that's come from in history and blah, blah, blah. But every single time you're on TV, you are setting an example. You are a politician. You are leading from the front. And I think that when I watch it, I have to turn it off, because I'm just like, I wouldn't be able to do that job, because I would take that, the staff things. But I think it's we're so disconnected from those kind of traditions and those, and you see it, no politician is popular, really, right? On a grand scale across the entire nation. They're gonna feel, I think, that pain of, short-term wins and political games. But I think the game of politics is already lost. So who to trust? It comes down to personal choice. It comes down to, in a sense, and it is going to continue to come down to those echo chambers. So that's why in climate change, it's important to provide different types of narratives, so that where you hit that news, it filters down into those echo chambers. and that self-preservation of, I believe that this is the right way for life and society, but actually here's how this news is trickling down into a way that's digestible for me. And on the other side as well, that's what a smart approach would be for this kind of issue. Politics, I don't know if I'd even bother.
Just check out.
Get the media behind it, and the politicians will follow.
Yeah.
Plainly.
I see, I hear of websites and apps and things that are like trying to bring all the news stories together and trying to kind of come to some kind of consensus. And then I hear about, I think it's a podcast called the Slow News Podcast, maybe, or if that's a website, I'm not sure. But all these things where they're trying to be less reactionary and they're trying to give a more broad picture. And I guess there's more traditional newspapers which have that reputation. But I know maybe you don't want to recommend a website or anything, but is that something you have looked into or thought about, like these people that are taking a more broad look rather than being reactionary and rather than just trying to get out ahead of everyone and just come up with a clickbait title? Are there any kind of ways, are there any people that are doing it right, I guess, is what I'm asking?
No.
No.
No is the short answer, because behind every media outlet is a agenda, right? Whether you think that it's good or bad, there is an agenda behind every media outlet. There is a service that I keep seeing popping up. I haven't explored it yet, but what they try to do is, I need to Google it and find the name of it. But basically, it's a service that it tries to find, it takes a story and it gives you that story in all of the different media outlets based on how kind of left they lean or how right they lean. So you can see immediately.
I think this is what I meant. Yeah. I'd heard something along those lines, and it might have been, who's that guy? His podcast, The Philosopher, Alex something. I can't remember his name, so forget that. But yeah, I feel like that's what he mentioned and who he's sponsored by. Yeah. We've got this, the left-leaning newspaper says this, the right-leaning one says this, the centrist one says this. So maybe this is the idea that we get from this. Do they agree on anything? Because maybe that's where the truth lies, perhaps.
This is it. So when you, like we talked about earlier, when you know the rules of the game, you start to see it differently. So I think it's called Ground News, and it's a paid-for subscription. I think I haven't used it yet, but the reason I haven't used it is because in my job, I have to be across all of the news. Yeah. So I can quickly see how, this outlet will take this story, and I can now start to pick apart, what are going to be the aspects that work for this media and this media over here. So on a personal level, it doesn't impact me. I think, as I say, that media literacy, those media skills, you're a primary school teacher. I think schools have possibly veered away from media studies and media literacy over the years because it got such a bad rep when those degrees appeared. But you know what? I would rejig and reshape up the education system somewhat. And one of the big things is how do you look at the world? How do you learn about what is going on in the world? And what do these media outlets mean? And what's going on behind them? How you do that in this political world is almost impossible. But we have to be able to look at the future of things. I think AI is going to be really interesting. Of who owns AI is going to be a continuing battle. That's going to be the next frontier, because if you put what is the news today, AI in theory will give you lots of different sources, and actually quite quickly you could ask it, where does this stand? Where does this media outlet stand? So actually the answers can come quite quickly. I think if you work in this sector, if you work in media, the biggest thing I would say to people just coming in is you need to be reading everything. You need to be watching everything. And you need to then start being able to kind of interrogate. For the average person that doesn't work in the sector, you're going to fall into categories of things that you like, things that kind of talk to your worldview. We kind of have to try and push people. We kind of have to try and engage people. And that's why I find it scary when organizations say we don't talk to that outlet, because that is the very beginnings of,
that's the beginning of the end kind of thing.
The beginning of the end. Yeah. We don't talk to them because they don't agree with what we think. Well, Can't you try and convince them? You know, are you that complete in your mission that you don't need them? We all need each other. Like if we look at climate change as a perfect example, we talked about, us throwing up our hands, China. We all need each other in this thing, and realizing that is kind of key. So it's an impossible task. It's genuine impossible task to navigate who and what and where from. I think maybe we'll start to see those things come through, but I think we need some big societal shifts. The world has changed, and we're still talking about it as if it's the 1980s. The world has changed so much that we do need to, do something. Things like public service outlets, broadcast is kind of in a unique world. Public service broadcast outlets like the BBC, yes, there is an agenda, there is bias. It's funny because depending on who you talk to, the BBC is a left-leaning organization. You talk to someone else and they're the most right-leaning organization. It's a minefield. And I think all that people can do is take in as many different sources as they possibly can. But ultimately, I think the baton lands with organizations. They have to take charge and talk to everybody.
Yeah, they've got to step up. Nice. I like it. And talking of, you mentioned a Netflix documentary. This has just kind of made me think that there's another one that's just out on Vietnam, which is like shocking, harrowing, really graphic. So, you have been warned. But one of the things that they talk about is how all of this mistrust of politicians and media can stem from the Vietnam War. It was like the first time where the American public and maybe even around the world felt like we've been lied to here. We've absolutely been sold a lie, and and then everything changed from then. So interesting.
Those moments, I had a real shock moment. I went to, I love Japan, and I think it's the coolest place on earth. Been there twice.
Nice.
And the second time I went to Hiroshima, and bear in mind, World War II, big moment in the history curriculum in the UK. I've not necessarily explored World War II much in my other life, other than what I've learned at school. And what you're taught is that this was a shocking, harrowing moment, but it was a shocking, harrowing moment that ultimately had to happen. There was no other way. So we're not the bad guys. We had to do it. I went into the Peace Museum, which is it's like a monument of the event. In there, at the end, you go through it's the most horrendous place I've ever visited. There were paintings from kids of the time, story, just the most, and it was challenging my view of you had to do it. That's what we had to do. Then you get to the end and you see letters, official communiques from the Japanese government, the US, the UK, where they were negotiating an end to the war. And you start to go, so I thought it was the only way. And suddenly you realize that actually, even from what you're learning at the very, very get-go, and it's part preservation. Doesn't necessarily, and it isn't necessarily the only view on this. And it's that for me was mind blowing. I don't think I spoke for the rest of the day because it was so obvious. But again, you look at where we're at as a society, and the sources and all that stuff coming at us. And then you see it from a different point of view that, your world is challenged and the world is only getting smaller. So these things are going to keep happening, which is why we're fighting and so divided. Politics it's a murky world. Let's say that.
For sure. Well, and this is why we are doing what we're doing, I guess. Keep talking, keep having conversations, get other people's point of view. I get to talk to someone like you who makes me stop and think about things from a slightly different perspective. So this is why I love the podcast, and appreciate your time, Josh, for coming on and talking about this. I do finish off with 3 quick fire questions if you've got time.
Yeah, of course.
Nice one. First one is, what's one lesson you wish you'd have been taught as a child?
The lesson when I reflect on stuff, the lesson I wish that I had been taught is not necessarily it's more of a soft skill. I
Mm.
think that the one thing I wish I'd been taught, or someone had sat me down and said, slow down.
Mhm.
For me, at that early age, I needed everything right now. I needed, and that continued into the world of work. I needed to get promoted. I needed to, and it was just this constant level of validation. And maybe it's because you're taught, you have your SATs, then you have your SATs in year 2, you have your SATs in year 6, you get GCSEs, and there's always a thing that you're kind of grappling onto the next thing. And what I've realized in my early 30s is not everything needs to be like that. I wish I could go back and say to me in my 20s, chill. Like, you don't need to cause yourself so much anguish about a promotion that ultimately doesn't mean very much. That kind of thing.
I hear
Um,
you. I hear you for
that I
sure.
think,
Next
yeah, that
question.
would be
Yeah. The next question is, what's one habit that you've added to your life, or a habit that you've kicked that's helping you feel happier and healthier?
my habit that I've kicked is to stop doom scrolling,
Nice.
and when uh, I kicked it when we were having. It was after the Brexit debates, in particular the debates in Parliament where Theresa May was getting voted down constantly. I kicked it because I realized that I was becoming like an addict. I was becoming an addict to like feeding into every conversation that was happening, and Twitter was like a buzz. It was almost like it was an addiction. Like, what's
Mm.
happening now, and this has happened in the morning, and there's a vote. Da, 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 da. And suddenly I realized that I was like, what am I doing? Theresa May doesn't care about me. um, and that, I think, is it. I still fall into it, but that's the main thing. You know, swooping in and swooping out. You have to stay in your life, not just the big scary thing that's constantly happening.
Mm, mm. And the last one, and I warn you, if people do find this one a bit tricky, but if you could give everyone in the world one book, which book would you give them?
Oh man, uh, I'm gonna cop out on this because there isn't one book that I would pick. What I love over and above everything is autobiographies.
Mm,
I can eat autobiography. I find people really, really interesting. I find people's stories really interesting because it tells you, it teaches you life lessons. How people have overcome adversity and turned it in. Like, I turn my adversity into a comedy and I take the Mickey out of myself, right? And I find that just love it. So for me, I anyone's autobiography, anyone's. Like, some of my favorites are like, one of the first sort of business books that I read was this old CEO of Tesco, Terry Leahy.
mm.
His book, I read that when I was about 15. I mean, I was a loser, clearly, but I found that really interesting. I love Alan Carr, the comedian. His
Mm.
books are just hilarious in the sense of, like, some really rough things happen and he turns that into I think that's brilliant. People like Dawn French, any autobiography is to me the dream, because
Nice.
you see how other people are just living and getting through things, and they turn it into something else. That for me is the biggest lesson in life.
Like it. Yeah, okay. Okay. A whole genre you're
Oh,
recommending.
genre, yeah. You were like,
That's
one
fine.
book. I'm like, here's a million.
Yeah, that's all good. We can bend the rules. It's fine. It's fine. Nice one. And finally, where can people connect with you and see what you're up to, see the work you're doing? Where would you like
Yeah.
to direct them towards?
So you can head over to our website, bbroadcast.co.uk, and then we're pretty active on LinkedIn and Blue Sky. I think we're at B Broadcast PR and Instagram. Yeah, they're the kind of the main places for us. And then I chat nonsense on Blue Sky as well. And I think it's just Josh T. Wheeler, but there's nothing of note going on there.
Nice one. Well, we can drop those in the show notes, and as well as a link to the report as well that we've been referencing throughout. Yeah, thanks so much again, Josh. Really appreciate your time for coming on the show. And yeah, looking forward to staying in touch.
Thanks so much, mate.
Thank you for tuning in. I hope you found my conversation with Josh insightful. If you did enjoy the episode, please do share it with friends, family, and colleagues who you think would find it interesting too. And remember, you can support the podcast by following and rating the show on whichever app you're listening on. Thank you again, and I look forward to bringing you another episode soon.
That was a Good Gosh Media production.